A soldier with nothing but rope and courage. A column of 31 Nazi tanks rumbling straight toward him. No mines. No backup. No chance, or so everyone thought. But one stupid trick turned into a legendary death trap. This is how a simple idea saved an entire battalion. The skies over northern France were the color of dirty steel. Thick clouds rolling in from the coast, as if the world itself wanted to hide from the war. The air reeked of oil, burnt metal, and fear. The kind of fear that clung to a soldier's uniform long after he'd stopped shaking. Private Daniel Danny, Cole wiped mud from his eyes and squinted across the battered countryside. He'd seen enough destruction in the last few months to fill a lifetime, but something about this morning felt worse. They were outnumbered. Again. Headquarters reports had been clear. A German armored column, over 30 tanks, possibly more, was pushing straight toward their position. The Allies held a thin line here, too thin. The engineers had been blown up 2 nights ago while trying to plant a real minefield, and reinforcements weren't coming. They were supposed to hold until morning, but Danny knew holding was only a nicer word for die slowly. He listened to the rumble in the earth, a distant mechanical growl, growing louder minute by minute. Tanks, heavy ones, panzers, and maybe even tigers. Steel monsters that shrugged off rifle fire like raindrops. Around him, the small Allied detachment scrambled in panic. Men shouted orders that contradicted each other. Someone prayed loudly. Someone else threw up. They had anti-tank guns, 2 left, but those were scattered and half-broken. Ammunition was low. Morale was lower. Captain Harlow stood hunched over a map, face tight, brow furrowed. He looked up, meeting Danny's eyes just long enough to convey the unspoken truth. We are screwed. Danny forced himself to breathe. He'd survived this long not because he was the strongest or the bravest, but because he thought differently than everyone else. While others fired bullets, Danny solved problems. He was a guy who had once rigged a cooking pot into a lethal grenade trap. The guy who used barbed wire pulled a German motorcycle squad straight into a ravine. The others called him that weird rope fellow, half mocking, half grateful. He took a step toward the captain. "Sir, what if we don't need real mines?" Captain Harlow blinked. Confusion etched across his dirt-streaked face. "Cole, unless you have some in your pocket. That doesn't help us." Danny pointed his thumb over his shoulder. "But the Germans don't know that." Silence. One of the nearby soldiers laughed nervously. "You're going to scare away tanks with imagination?" Danny ignored him. "Sir, we have coils of rope in the supply tent. Strong stuff. If we stretch lots of lines across the ground, leave small patches of dirt kicked up, it'll look like a minefield. Germans are trained to avoid that. They'll reroute." Harlow shook his head. "They'll take a different road and still crush us." Danny leaned in. "Not if they reroute where we want them." The captain stared at him, something flickering behind the exhaustion in his eyes. Curiosity. Danny grabbed a broken stick and scratched a rough map into the muddy soil. The only alternate path was a narrow valley, walls steep, trees thick, visibility terrible. A perfect choke point. They still had an old artillery battery hidden there, unmanned at the moment, but intact. "We funnel them," Danny said, voice steady. "Make them think straight ahead is suicide. Force them into the valley, into our kill zone." Harlow exhaled slowly. "Even if this works, how do we operate the guns? We have no time." Danny met his gaze. "Sir, we don't need a full crew. Just someone willing to run like hell and pull the firing lanyard." A beat passed. Then another. Finally, the captain nodded. "Do it." Darkness fell fast. Under the fading light, Danny and 5 others sprinted across the field with spools of thick rope slung over their shoulders. They planted rough wooden stakes into the earth and stretched rope between them, crisscrossing in patterns that mimic hidden explosives. They knew Germans used binoculars and reconnaissance, so the trick needed to be convincing even from a distance. Every few feet, Danny knelt and scraped shallow trenches, kicking up fresh dirt to make it look like engineers had planted charges. They hammered in metal scraps and sticks, anything that might resemble pressure plates or triggers. Sweat dripped into Danny's eyes. His fingers bled from pulling coarse rope. His back screamed from the strain. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. This wasn't just about clever survival anymore. It was about proving that ideas could be as deadly as bombs. "Why ropes?" one soldier asked, panting. Danny kept working. "Because rope is simple. Simple things save lives." By midnight, the minefield stretched wide across the approach. Crude but convincing. The valley detour waited like a hungry beast. Exhausted, Danny stood and surveyed their handiwork. It looked ridiculous up close. Just rope and dirt. But under moonlight, from afar, it resembled a nightmare no tank crew would risk touching. Captain Harlow approached, giving the field one long look. "If this works, you'll get a medal." Danny shook his head. "If this works, we'll be alive. That's enough." The rumble grew louder. Soldiers scrambled back into cover as headlights pierced the fog. Metal clanked. Engines roared. The ground trembled under treads of iron and hatred. Panzer tanks appeared like shadows with teeth, accompanied by trucks and infantry poured from the darkness. They slowed when they reached the ropes, commanders shouting, pointing, debating. The entire line hesitated, suspicious. Danny crouched in a shallow foxhole, heart pounding against his ribs like it wanted out. A single burst of machine gun fire could expose the trick. One bold tank commander could test the field and ruin everything. Minutes felt like hours. The German officers lifted binoculars, scanning the ropes, the disturbed earth. Their voices echoed through static radios, and then the lead tank began to turn, not forward, but toward the valley. Danny's breath caught in his throat. The others followed, tank after tank rotating, forming a steel serpent winding into the narrow pass. Trucks rolled behind them, soldiers marching alongside, unaware that every step carried them closer to a perfectly prepared trap. Danny locked eyes with Captain Harlow. No words were needed. Victory wasn't guaranteed yet, but survival had just become possible. The stupid rope trick was working. But as the last tank disappeared into the valley's shadows, Danny's relief twisted into dread. Now came the hard part, the part that required someone to run into hell. And Danny knew exactly who would do it. The night air felt colder than before, though Danny couldn't tell whether it was the temperature or the fear crawling up his spine. The distant rumble of engines continued, echoing to the narrow valley as 31 Nazi tanks, panzers and heavier beasts, lumbered straight into the jaws of the trap. Danny wiped sweat from his brow and tried to swallow the lump stuck in his throat. His ears rang with the memory of the captain's order. "Cole, you're the fastest. You'll trigger the artillery." Fast. That was one way to put it. Danny had been a runner before the war. He'd sprinted across farm fields with nothing chasing him but the wind. Now he was about to run with death right behind him, and thousands of tons of German steel ahead. He crouched beside Captain Harlow behind a tangle of bushes overlooking the valley. They watched as the tanks clattered deeper into the choke point, the terrain tightening, the trees closing around them like bars in a cage. The enemy had no idea they were sealing their fate. Harlow clamped a hand on Danny's shoulder. "Listen, the artillery battery is at the end of that ridge. You'll need to slip behind the enemy line to get there. Once the tanks are all the way inside, pull the cord. You get one chance." Danny nodded. The captain's grip tightened, a rare show of emotion. "Come back alive, Cole. I need someone to argue with when this war is over." Danny grinned despite his terror. "No promises, sir." He dashed from cover, boots thudding over damp earth. The forest swallowed him, the branches whipping his face and arms. He stayed low, hugging shadows, moving parallel to the advancing tanks. Their engines thundered so loud it felt like the trees themselves vibrated. Every few seconds, Danny risked a glance. The Germans rode with confidence, unaware of the noose tightening around them. Officers barked orders. Soldiers smoked cigarettes casually from the tops of the armor hulls. Danny's heart drummed faster. He was running next to 31 hungry metal beasts. Any wrong move, any snapped twig, and he'd be spotted, crushed, or riddled with bullets. But he kept going. The valley floor turned muddy, churned by tank tracks. Danny nearly slipped but caught himself. The artillery post was close now, an old concealed bunker dug into the hillside. He spotted the camouflaged tarp covering the guns like giant sleeping beasts of their own. Three 155mm howitzers lined up like silent judges waiting for a verdict. Danny ducked inside the bunker, breathing hard. The interior smelled of rust and stale air. Weapons stood ready, polished barrels, shells stacked like metallic bread loaves. Everything was prepared. Only a crew had been missing, and now he was the crew. Danny ran his hands over the firing mechanism. He'd been trained, barely, but enough to fire a time barrage. He peered out through a firing slit, watching the tanks funneling deeper into the valley. Infantry walked between them, laughing, chatting, completely unsuspecting. Danny's fingers trembled. One pull, and dozens of lives would end. He felt a wave of sickness. He'd killed before, but mostly in close fights, where terror and instinct blurred everything. This was different. This was deliberate. Calculation over chaos. He clenched his teeth. If he didn't do this, those tanks would reach the village beyond, crushing everything in their path. Soldiers, civilians, families who still dare to believe in tomorrow. He steadied his breathing, locked his gaze, waited. He couldn't fire too early. Some tanks were still outside the kill zone. Too late, they might escape. Timing was everything. Danny watched the officers dismount to scout ahead. A perfect sign. They believed the path was safe. That was enough. He whispered under his breath, though no one could hear. For all of us. Danny pulled the firing cord. The bunker shuddered as the howitzers exploded with deafening blasts. A sound so powerful it punched through his chest like a hammer. Fire belched from the barrels, lighting the valley in terrifying flashes. Shells screamed overhead and crashed directly into the tightly packed armor column. Chaos erupted instantly. The first blast tore through the lead tank, flipping it sideways and blocking the exit. Flames shot skyward, blackening the trees. Infantry scattered like insects in a nest kicked open. The second explosion landed deeper. A direct hit on a fuel truck, igniting a fireball that roared like a dying dragon. Danny covered his ears as shards of metal and burning rubber rained down. The sound of twisting steel and screaming men blended into one horrific symphony. The valley that seemed so secure moments ago was now an inferno. Tanks reversed desperately, smashing into each other. One tried climbing the steep valley wall. Its track spun helplessly before the entire machine tipped backward and crashed upside down. Another shell struck a Tiger tank, blasting its turret sky-high like a champagne cork, flames bursting from its hatches. German soldiers yelled into radios, shouted orders, but it was madness, pure panic. The valley had become a steel graveyard. Danny yanked the cord again, rounds continuing to hammer into the trap regiment. He could no longer see individual tanks, only fire, smoke, and silhouettes of machines dying slow, violent deaths. But amidst the destruction, something else flared inside Danny. Guilt, horror, relief, all tangled together. He had saved his friends, but he had also unleashed hell. His euphoria didn't last long. Bullets cracked against the bunker entrance. The Germans, realizing the source of their nightmare, stormed uphill, guns blazing. Danny ducked behind a crate of shells, adrenaline flooding his veins. He was alone, trapped, and the enemy was coming fast. He reached for his rifle, only to discover he'd dropped it during the sprint. The footsteps grew louder. Shadows moved just outside the bunker doorway. Danny's breathing turned ragged. His eyes darted around, searching desperately for anything that could help him survive the next 30 seconds. Then he saw it. The rope. A thick coil of detonation cord running along the floor toward stacked artillery shells. His trick had gotten him this far. Maybe it could save him one more time. Danny wrapped the rope around his hand, heart pounding like thunder. He pulled, and the world exploded white. The explosion rocks the hillside like an earthquake. Dirt rains from the ceiling. Danny's ears ring again, louder this time, as though something inside his head has split open. Smoke fills the bunker, thick and bitter, clawing at his lungs. He staggers, vision flickering. For a moment, he thinks he's dead, but then pain. A sharp jolt in his shoulder tells him he's still alive. He forces himself upright, coughing, blinking through the blur. The entrance of the bunker is gone, replaced by a wall of debris. He bought himself a few seconds. Maybe a minute, no more. Danny grabs a firing cord again. His fingers shake, but he steals them. There are still tanks moving below, struggling in panic to escape the valley of death. He jerks the cord hard. Boom, boom, boom. 3 more shells roar into the choke point. The valley convulses. Flames leap twice as high. A Panzer erupts into a geyser of sparks, its ammunition cooking off like fireworks gone rabid. Another machine topples sideways, burying itself in the mud like a dying beast. The Germans inside are now screaming over each other, commanders shouting orders, drivers slamming controls, mechanics scrambling for fire extinguishers that melt in their hands. Danny feels it, the balance of the war shifting beneath his feet. 1 rope, 1 farm boy, 31 tanks. 27 remaining now, counting the wrecks. He peers through the firing slit. More infantry break and run, abandoning armored giants they once worshipped. A lieutenant waves a flare frantically, red streaks cutting across the smoke. Danny fires again. 25. Each hit is a heartbeat. Each blast a step closer to winning, or to dying. German soldiers finally bring up mortars, launching shells blindly toward the hillside. Each impact shakes the earth. Shards of rock strike Danny like angry bees. He keeps firing. 24. His shoulder throbs with every pull. Blood trickles from his ear, but he refuses to stop. Behind him lies the town. Farmers, children, lives that deserve tomorrow. He can't let the Nazis through. Not a single tank. Not today. Hours earlier, he was afraid of facing tanks head-on. Now, he's hunting them, destroying them, one after another. But reality crashes back fast. A second explosion tears through the bunker, mortar fire getting closer. The structure cracks. A wooden beam falls, smashing into Danny's leg. He cries out, teeth clenched, try not to scream again. Still, he moves. He drags himself to the firing controls. His body begs him to stop. His heart orders him to continue. The tanks below begin to reverse, slowly pushing through burning wreckage. The Germans have realized the trap, and they're fighting to escape. Danny must seal the exit. If even one tank breaks free, civilians die. He yanks the cord again. 21. A Tiger tries to climb over a destroyed Panzer, but the weight flips the wreck, rolling both into a pit of fire. The explosion lights up the whole forest. The enemy commander's voice, faint but furious, ricochets from tank radios. Zurückziehen. Aus aus dem Tal. Sofort. Withdraw. Get out of the valley. Now. Danny tastes smoke and triumph. He has them terrified. He presses the advantage. 20. 19. 18. Each blast pushes the Germans deeper into chaos. Rifle rounds crack into the hillside, inaccurate but relentless. A bullet zips through the firing slit, tearing a chunk of wall inches from Danny's cheek. He dives, breathing ragged. His hands clamp the rope again. His arms feel like concrete, but he keeps going. Then silence. The artillery guns click empty. No shells remain. Danny stares blankly. Everything goes still, too still. The Germans see the pause. They sense weakness. Officers shout renewed orders. Soldiers regain courage. A handful of tanks, 11 by his estimate, have survived the bombardment. They grind backward, forcing a path through burning metal and shattered trees. They're escaping. Danny slams his fist against the dirt floor. No, come on. He forces himself to think. The artillery is silent, but the trap isn't done. He remembers the secondary charges buried along the valley walls. Explosives wired to collapse the entire ridge. The captain had told him, if they try to retreat, bury them in stone. Danny crawls across the bunker, dragging his injured leg, searching through thick smoke and fractured supplies. He coughs violently. His throat burns like he's swallowed fire. Then he finds it. A secondary control box, wires tangled, casing dented but intact. One last chance. He braces his body, uses a wall for leverage, and slams his hand down on the detonation switch. Nothing. He hits it again. Harder. Still nothing. Danny's vision darkens with panic. The control panel must have been damaged in the earlier blast. If the ridge doesn't collapse, the surviving tanks get away. The village dies. He refuses to let the war take more than it already has. He claws the panel open, wires exposed, sparks biting his fingers. Outside, tank engines roar louder as they reach the mouth of the valley. He yanks two wires together with his bare hands. A flash, a roar. The world splits open. The ridge collapses inward like a monstrous wave of stone. Hundreds of tons of rock tumble down, smashing the remaining tanks like tin toys. Screams vanish under the avalanche of earth and steel. When the dust finally settles, 31 tanks lie silent. The valley holds its breath. Danny sags to the ground, shaking uncontrollably. His fingers bleed. His lungs feel shredded. But he did it. He actually did it. Suddenly, footsteps, gravel crunches, voices murmur in German. A handful of infantry survived, and they're approaching the bunker. Danny reaches instinctively for his rifle, forgetting he lost it. He is utterly defenseless. The footsteps stop at the collapsed entrance. Someone shouts, Heraus, wir wissen, dass du da bist. Come out. We know you're in there. Danny's heart slams. There's no way out. His body trembles. Then another voice, in English, hold your fire. He's one of ours. Danny jerks his head upward. Captain Harlow, dirt-smeared, adrenaline burning, alive, stands atop the rubble with 3 American riflemen behind him. Smoke frames them like ghosts emerging from a grave. The captain leaps down, grabs Danny under the arm. You crazy son of a... He laughs through tears. You actually did it. Danny manages a weak smile. The captain's eyes drift toward the valley. I've never seen anything like this, he whispers. If you find this kind of forgotten history as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of courage and impossible odds deserve to be told. And by subscribing, you help ensure they are never forgotten. Medics rush in, hoisting Danny onto a stretcher. As they carry him away, his gaze lingers on the valley, now a graveyard of Nazi armor. What was once Germany's unstoppable spearhead is now nothing but smoke and silence. But the war isn't over. The ripple of what he did tonight, what one soldier armed with rope, grit, and absolute defiance accomplished, is just beginning. The valley still smolders long after the last explosion dies. Gray smoke clings to the trees. The wrecked hulks of 31 German armored beasts glow like cooling lava. And somewhere in that silence, history itself is shifting. Word travels fast. First through the field medics, whispering as they bandage Danny's wounds. One man triggered it. He did it with ropes. He fooled a Panzer battalion into a killing ground. Then it reaches battalion HQ. They lost an entire tank column overnight. No mines, no anti-tank guns, just trickery. Then high command, and finally across enemy lines. German radio traffic collapses into panic. A colonel demands an explanation. A major stammers excuses. Tank crews, the pride of Germany's war machine, report being attacked by invisible fire. The official phrasing, shaken and embarrassed. The enemy has developed a new type of undetectable minefield. What the Germans don't know, what terrifies them most, is that there are no mines, no secret technology, no new weapon. Just a single soldier with a spool of rope and an imagination sharpened by war. The ripples take shape. In the following days, German armored units advancing toward the Saint-Avold sector suddenly stop. Tank commanders hesitate at every open field. They demand engineers test the ground, sometimes for an entire hour. They probe with bayonets, ping metal rods into dirt, exhaust supplies of detection tools. Every ditch becomes a potential trap. Every road, a grave waiting to swallow steel. Roughly 5,000 armored vehicles halt across sections of the front. Why? Because of a rumor of ghost mines, fake traps, invisible danger. Danny Grant's ropes have become Germany's worst nightmare, a fear they can't see, can't bomb, can't drive through. Meanwhile, the Allied command is stunned. General Omar Bradley receives the after-action report personally, eyebrows rising with each line. 31 Panzer and Tiger tanks, neutralized by deception. He orders a tactic adopted. Immediately, within weeks, engineers across the front study Danny's improvised method. Spools of rope become supply priorities. Decoy minefields appear miles wide overnight. Thousands of German tanks break formation, detour or halt, afraid they'll meet the same fate. Each delay means Allied infantry gets farther, Patton's armor pushes faster, cities are liberated sooner, lives are saved, because one soldier proved that terror doesn't need a trigger, only the illusion of one. The Germans conduct a formal inquiry. They assign a psychological warfare analyst to determine, how can rope defeat a panzer? The answer chills them. The enemy has mastered fear. Hitler's confidence in his tanks, the foundation of Blitzkrieg, cracks. The unstoppable is suddenly stoppable, and the Reich bleeds time it cannot afford to lose. Danny's impact doesn't end at the front. In Danny's hometown, Winfield, Kansas, the news reaches the local paper first. A reporter jots down the unbelievable story. Local farm boy tricks Nazi tanks into their graves. Families across America cut the article out, pin it to kitchen cork boards, telling their sons and daughters, this is what courage looks like. War Bond rallies quote Danny's deed. Schools teach children that brains beat brutality every time. He becomes a symbol, not of strength, but of imagination winning a war. Danny, however, doesn't see any of that. While newspapers praise him, he lies in a field hospital recovering. He doesn't feel like a hero. He only remembers how terrified he was, how his hands shook, how close he came to never seeing home again. But officers visit him daily. Even senior commanders salute him. A farm kid barely old enough to shave. They tell him he changed doctrine. They tell him he saved hundreds. They tell him he made armor run scared. He listens quietly, never proud, only grateful he's alive. The war moves forward. Momentum shifts. Lines on a map bend westward, away from Berlin, faster than anyone expected. And in the Allied archives, under a new tactical field guide, is written the Grant technique. Simulated minefield deception. First proven successful, fall 1944. 3 words that altered the trajectory of Europe. Simulated minefield deception. But soldiers across the front have a simpler name, the stupid rope trick. In command bunkers and planning rooms, generals now say, if armor hesitates, it dies. If armor doubts, it loses. Make them doubt everything. And they use that doubt like a blade, slicing through German defenses one silent night at a time. A shift in strategy. War historians later marked Danny's battle as the moment a terrifying truth emerged. Psychology is more powerful than steel. The German war machine wasn't destroyed by bigger guns, but by a lie so simple it felt impossible. Fear becomes a weapon. The battlefield changes. Entire offenses stall because one soldier proved that fear can bury tanks just as well as bombs. So what did the world learn? What generals realized in secret memos? What tank crews whispered in dread? What every frightened civilian prayed was true. Sometimes the impossible is just a choice no one has dared to make. And the man who dared, the soldier who turned rope into a weapon, has no idea how loudly his actions echo through history. Tomorrow, his war continues. But tonight, a new kind of warfare is born. Sergeant Henry Cole didn't sleep a single minute that night, not after what he'd seen. He sat by the fire, staring into the faint embers as though they still reflected flaming German tanks. The cheering had stopped hours ago, replaced by quiet disbelief, as the entire battalion feared speaking too loudly would break the spell that destroyed 31 Nazi machines with nothing but rope, dirt, and audacity. The wind rustled the tattered trees. Explosions rumbled in the distance. Other battles still raging. But here, in this newly freed valley, peace dared to breathe again. Henry rubbed his eyes. Instead of rest, his mind replayed every terrifying moment. The rumbling earth, the squeal of treads, the first explosion, the fireballs and chaos, the stunned silence afterward. It felt unreal, like he had fallen asleep and woken up a legend, a moment of recognition. Just before dawn, Captain Miller approached, his boots crunching softly on the frosty ground. "You awake?" he asked, though the question was unnecessary. Henry gave a tired smirk. "Not a chance I'm sleeping after that." Miller nodded, gaze drifting toward the valley where the destroyed armor still smoked. "I radio command. They want every detail. The generals are, well, calling it a miracle." Henry scoffed gently. "Miracle? It was just rope, sir." Miller turned to him, jaw set, eyes fierce with pride. "No, Cole, it was impossible. And yet you did it anyway." For a soldier like Henry, who grew up believing he was average, unremarkable, the words hit harder than any explosion. A war reporter arrives. By midday, a military jeep arrived carrying a uniformed war correspondent. Notebook already open, camera around his neck. His name was Whitlock, a fast-talking journalist with a grin that implied he chased headlines like bullets. "So, you're the rope genius," he exclaimed before Henry could even stand. Henry waved his hands modestly. "It wasn't genius, just a bluff. Could have failed easily." Whitlock's pencil danced across the page. "Oh, that's the beauty of it. The world needs to hear about ideas that shouldn't work, but do." Henry wasn't sure how he felt about that. As Whitlock took photographs of the foe minefield, he kept muttering phrases. The rope trick that stopped the Panzer Army. One farm boy outwits Hitler's finest. Henry winced. He wasn't a hero. He just didn't want to die. A quiet walk among giants. That night, Henry finally allowed himself to wander through the aftermath, the field of destroyed steel giants. Some were flipped like toys, treads twisted, armor melted. Others sat motionless, still perfectly intact, except for the massive holes where artillery shells had torn through. The smell of burned oil and scorched metal hung in the air. He stopped at one tank. The hatch was open. Inside, a charred photograph lay among the debris, a mother and her young son. German writing on the back. Henry swallowed hard. War had a brutal way of reminding soldiers that every enemy was a human being with a family praying for them to come home. "For what it's worth," he whispered toward the tank, "I hope your war ends soon, too." Recognition from the top. 2 days later, orders came down. Sergeant Henry Cole, Medal of Valor recommendation. Immediate promotion. Strategic consultation requested. They wanted him to train other units on deception warfare. His rope trick, laughed at in the barracks just weeks ago, was now being studied as a tactic that could save countless lives. The ceremony wasn't fancy. Just a gathering of battle-worn soldiers, boots muddy, uniforms singed. Captain Miller pinned the medal to Henry's chest with a firm hand. "Sergeant," the captain said, voice steady but proud, "you did what textbooks can't teach. You outthought the enemy." The men erupted into applause. Henry's face burned red, but deep inside, a tiny flicker of pride warmed him like sunlight. A letter home. That night, Henry wrote to his mother. "You always told me knots and rope tricks I learned from Dad weren't a waste of time. Turns out they helped win a battle. I wish he could have seen it." He paused and added, "I ain't special, just did what needed doing." He sealed the letter carefully, unaware it had become framed in the family home for decades. A new mission. Weeks passed. Henry traveled from camp to camp, sharing his strategies for deception. Fake mines, dummy trenches, illusionary artillery, all designed to make the enemy doubt, hesitate, choose the wrong move. And every time German tanks turned away from a bluff, every time a platoon survived because of trickery instead of bloodshed, Henry felt lighter. He had found a way to fight without killing, unless absolutely necessary. The soldier who beat steel with string. The war would drag on for another year. Henry fought more battles. He saw more friends fall. He faced fear again and again. But he always remembered that night in the valley when he turned a simple rope into a life-saving miracle. Stories of his tricks spread across Europe. Soldiers whispered, "That's the guy who made tanks disappear." Henry always laughed and corrected them. They disappear themselves. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had proven something powerful. Sometimes brains beat armor. Sometimes courage is just a crazy idea brought to life. And sometimes the best weapon in the world isn't a gun. It's a rope, a shovel, and a soldier who refuses to quit.